Good morning, class. Today we will tackle about the sample and sampling procedure. I am your teacher, Sir Redentor M. Casilio. Before we start with the discussion of the sampling technique or procedure, let us define first what is meant by sample and population. When we say sample, it is a small group of members selected from a population to represent the population. It is also a subset of population chosen to participate in a study. It also serves as a basis for drawing conclusion about the target population. On the other hand, a population is a group from which a sample is drawn. Let's take a look on this picture, class. So as you can see here, the population is composed of different people with different characteristics such as age, sex, nationality, etc. While on the right side, class, you can see here the sample. So meaning to say that the sample is taken from a population. As you can see also, class, when we say population, it is composed of a bigger number of people, while the sample is the lesser number of people. Let us have the example. In the opening of the limited face-to-face classes class, only 15 students are selected to participate in the limited face-to-face classes. Meaning to say, the sample is the 15 students who are chosen, while the population is the number of students enrolled in your section. Let's say, for example, let us have the population of a section Jacinto. Section Jacinto has 30 students enrolled, which is the population, and only 12 students out of 30 students in Jacinto grade 11 are chosen to participate in the limited face-to-face classes. Meaning to say that 12 students are your sample. Next is the sampling. So when we say sampling, it is the process of getting information from a proper set of population. So the fundamental purpose of all sampling plans is to describe the population characteristics through the values obtained from a sample as accurately as possible. It is therefore evident that if one were to draw conclusions based on a small sample, then the sample must imitate the behavior or characteristics of the original population as closely as possible. Meaning to say, class, sampling is the list of all individuals or objects included in the target population. Now, considering those students who participated in the limited face-to-face classes, more or less, the characteristics of these students who will be participating in the limited face-to-face classes are those students who had difficulty in independent learning. So, ibig sabihin, more or less, to help the students to overcome the difficulties they've encountered while answering the learning task, yun ang posible na characteristic or basihan bakit sila napili for for being one of the participant of the limited face-to-face classes. Yun yung sinasabi natin na sampling method. Mayroong common characteristics of among the respondents of the study. Next is what we call the sampling plan. When we say sampling plan, class, it is a detailed outline of which measurements will be taken at what times, on which material, in what manner, and by whom that support the purpose of an analysis. Sampling plan also should be designed in such a way that the resulting data will contain a representative sample of the parameters of interest and allow for all questions as stated in the research objectives to be answered. So, ang mahalaga for the sampling plan natin is to identify our target respondents of the study with the same parameters of interest, and it allows for all the questions. Hindi pa pwedeng sabihin natin that our respondents are different in terms of their characteristics. So dapat mayroong common interest doon sa lahat ng ating mga respondents. Now, what about the sample size? The sample size is what we call, stands for the small letter n, is the number of elements in the sample set. It considers precision of the result in using the sample instead of the population. So, ibig sabihin lang nito, class, uh, out of the population, ilan yung possible na sample size natin. So, aalamin natin what could be the possible sample size on the study. Ano? Next is what we call the sampling techniques. Now, class, there are two types of sampling techniques. Number one is a probability sampling, and the other one is the non-probability sampling. When we say probability sampling, it refers to a sampling technique in which samples are obtained using some objective chance mechanism, thus involving randomization, and they require the use of sampling frame or a list or map of all the sampling units in the population. The probabilities of selection are known, and they are generally referred to as a random sample from a finite population. Ibig sabihin, class, in other words, probability has an equal chance of being selected. Ibig sabihin, lahat ng respondents ay mayroong tsansa na sila ay mapili. Now, what are those probability sampling technique? Number one is what we call the simple random sampling. It is the basic probability sampling design in which the sample is selected by a process that does not only give each element in the population a chance of being included in the sample, but also makes the selection of every possible combination of the desired number of cases equally likely. The sample is selected in one of two ways: by means of a table of random numbers or by using the lottery technique. So, ganito mangyayari natin for the SRS or Simple Random Sampling Method. Since sabi natin ang probability sampling ay mayroong equal chance of being selected, so in the lottery technique class, let's say for example, sa section Rizal, lahat ng names ng section Rizal ay ilalagay siya sa isang box or isusulat sa isang papel, and then ilalagay sa isang box yung kanilang mga pangalan. So, using the simple random sampling method, let's say for example, gusto nating pumili lamang ng at least 80% of the population ng grade 11 Rizal ang makasama lang na lang natin for our respondents. So, ang gagawin lamang during the SRS, we have to pick one paper at a time doon sa box. O let's say for example, pick ka ng isang papel from the box, and then kung sino yung mapili mo ng 80% of the section result will be the participants of your study. So ganun lang yung simple random sampling method. Ibig sabihin, mayroon talagang equal chances na maselect sila or mapili sila during doon sa pag-pick ng kanilang mga pangalan. Now, what about systematic random sampling? It is affected by drawing units at regular intervals from a list. The starting point or the first units to be taken as a random choice. It differs from one simple random sampling where each member of the population is not chosen independently. Once the first member has been selected, all the other members of the random sample are automatically determined. The population list in the systematic sampling must be in random order. So, for the systematic random sampling method class, tandaan mo meron siyang tinatawag na every ninth, every nth element. O let's say for example, um, gusto niyo mag-survey ng ilan ba sa bawat bahay or sa bawat bahay ang bilang ng mga mag-aaral. Okay, now, ng sabi nyo bilang researchers, hindi natin kakayanin kung lahat ng bahay dito sa Pitogo, Quezon ay bibilangin natin ang mga mag-aaral using a systematic or random sampling method, malilesen yung pamamaraan natin para makita natin ilan ang bilang ng mga estudyante sa bawat bahay. O supposing ganito, nag ano tayo, nag-start tayo ng pagbibilang from sisirin. O, sabi natin, yung pinakadulo ng bahay sa sisirin will be the starting point. At sabi natin, every 123rd na bahay, yun ang kukuhain natin ng respondents. So, ibig sabihin, para malaman natin kung sino ang mga respondents for our study, dapat mula doon sa unang o sa last na bahay sa sisirin sa pinili natin, bibilang tayo ng 123. Yung every 123rd na makuha nating bahay, yun ang ating magiging sample hanggang sa matapos natin yung lahat ng bahay sa Pitogo, Quezon. Or para mas madali, sa section ninyo, let's say, i-assume na lang natin, ang section ninyo ay mayroong 40 students. Okay. Sabi ko as a teacher, okay, mag-start tayo kay number 2. Yung every second element, siya ang magiging respondents nyo. So, ibig sabihin, your respondents would be 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34, 36, 38, 40. So, ganun ang systematic random sampling method. Ikaw, mismo yung nag-a-assign kung saan ka magsisimula at ikailang element ba ang pipiliin mo. In this example class, as you can see, so ang pinili niya dito ay every third element. So we have 3, 6, and 9. That is a systematic random sampling method. Now what about stratified random sampling method? It is a selecting subsamples proportionate in size to the significant characteristics of the total population. Different strata in the population are defined and each member of the stratum is listed. Stratified random sampling method assures the researcher that his or her sample will be representative of the population in terms of certain critical factors that have been used as the basis for stratification. So, it also assures adequate cases for subgroup analysis. Okay, so for the stratified random sampling method, you divide your respondents with different strata. And each strata could have at least one or two representative depending on the number of respondents in every strata. Or in this example class, kinuha niya, we select only one person from each strata. One from strata 1, one from strata 2, and one from strata 3. So, ibig sabihin class, out of the strata, pipili tayo ng isang representative kada strata. O assuming, ang grade 11 sections has 4, di ba? We have Jacinto, Rizal, Bonifacio, and Mabini. O, Rizal, Mabini, Bonifacio, and Jacinto are strata. Okay, strata 1, Jacinto, strata 2, Rizal, strata 3, Bonifacio, strata 4, Mabini. So, kung gagamitin natin stratified random sampling method, kukuha tayo ng equal number sa Bonifacio, sa Rizal, sa Mabini at sa Jacinto. So ganon ang stratified random sampling. Next is what we call the cluster sampling. It is a technique in which the unit of sampling is not the individual, but the naturally occurring group of individuals. The technique is used when it is more convenient to select individuals from a defined population. It considers a universe divided into a letter big N, which is the population, mutually exclusive subgroups called clusters, and a random sample of a small letter n, which is the sample. Clusters is selected and their elements are completely enumerated. It is administratively convenient to implement and its main advantage is saving time and money. Katulad sa stratified random sampling method, ang ginagawa din natin for the cluster is we divide the people in different groups. Ang kaibahan lang nito sa stratified sampling method, yung buong cluster or yung buong people doon sa isang cluster ang pinipili natin. Like for example, sa sections ng apat ng grade 11. Jacinto, Rizal, Bonifacio, Mabini. Di ba, for the stratified sampling method, kumuha tayo ng equal number for each section. Sa cluster sampling method, isang section lamang ang kukuhain natin. Kung Bonifacio, all the students enrolled under Bonifacio should be the participant of the study. Hindi tayo kukuha kay Jacinto, Mabini at saka kay Rizal. Ganon ang cluster. Ano? Hindi individual kundi group of individuals. Now, what about the last one, the multi-stage sampling? It refers to the procedure as in cluster sampling, which moves through a series of stages from more inclusive to the less inclusive sampling units until arriving at the population elements that constitute the desired sampling. Okay, ganito naman ginagawa natin for the multi-stage sampling. So as you can see here, class, um, pinili niya muna yung state, tapos out of that state, yung district niya, out of that district, yung village, out of that village, yung household na mismo. Parang ganito yan. Okay, supposing that meron tayong region, di ba? We have the region 4A. Under region 4A, we have Calabarzon. Under Calabarzon, we have Cavite, Laguna, Rizal, and Quezon. So, pinili lang natin out of Calabarzon, Quezon. So, out of that Quezon, we have four districts. Pipili lang natin third districts. Out of that third districts, marami tayong mga towns and municipalities. Pipiliin lang natin ay Pitogo. That is a multi-stage sampling. Group of individuals, pero pinaliit natin yung ating mga uh, target sample. So, ibig sabihin lang class, when we say we're getting the sample, pinapa-reduce natin yung number of respondents. Kasi ang reason kung bakit natin uh, nililiitan yung ating sample is dahil nga kapag sobrang dami ng ating participants or respondents ng ating study, ay napaka marami tayong yung time hindi natin matatapos talaga siya. At ang maganda lang din for having the sample, alamin natin yung mga characteristics ng bawat respondents natin na alam naman natin na makakatugon doon sa ating mga questions. Next, another technique is what we call the non-probability sampling technique. This is a technique when there is no way of estimating the probability that each element has of being included in the sample and no assurance that every element has a chance of being included. The major forms of non-probability sampling are accidental, purposive, and quota. So, kung kanina sa probability sampling natin, there is an equal chance of being selected. Sa non-probability, walang chance of being included. Okay, now, first, we have accidental sample. So, accidental sample is one which the investigator simply reaches out and take the cases that are at hand, continuing the process until the sample reaches the designed size. This is one of the most common techniques of sampling, and this is also known as the man of the street interviews conducted frequently by television news program to get quick reading public opinion. So, accidental sampling method is also called convenience sampling. So, kung sino yung most accessible respondents, yun yung kinukuha natin respondent. Let's say for example, gusto mong malaman kung ano ang gusto mong panoorin, ABS-CBN ba, GMA ba, or TV5. You just go to one corner of the street and you just ask kung sino yung mga dadaan do'n. Gano'n lang yung accidental sampling method or convenience sampling method. Now, what about purposive sampling method? It is a judgment sampling used when practical considerations prevent the use of probability sampling. Since sampling errors and biases cannot be computed for non-probability samples, purposive or judgmental sampling should be limited to situations like when the probable errors are not serious and when probability sampling is practically impossible. So we are just selecting based on our judgment. So let's say for example, you wanted to have a public opinion the of your respondents in terms of having a vaccine. So you do it for a purpose. Ano yung judgment mo for the vaccine? Okay, next is what we call the quota sampling. So it is a technique with provision to guarantee the inclusion in the sample of diverse elements in the population and to make sure that these diverse elements are taken into account in the proportion in which they occur in the population. So in the quota sampling class, you select people non-randomly according to some fixed quota. Wala kang kung sino dumating, kung sino yung kailangan mo, yun ang papasagutan mo. Let's say for example, sabi mo, gusto mo mag-research, or a market research possible. 20 na adult women, 20 na adult men, 20 na teenagers male, 20 na teenagers na female. Once completed na yung 20 adult women mo at may dumating pang isang babae na adult, hindi mo na siya kukuhaan ng respondent kasi dumating ka na sa quota eh. Yun na yung fixed na kailangan mong number. Okay, let's say for example, you still have five more adult men. O di yung first five na adult men na papasagutan mo na survey, yun ang magiging part ng respondents mo. In excess of that 20 adult women or men, hindi na siya part ng inyong respondents as well as doon sa teenagers ng male at saka ng female. Now, quota sampling has two types, proportional and the non-proportional. So the one in which the investigator simply reaches out and makes the cases that are at hand, continuing the process until the sample reaches a designated area. Select people non-randomly according to some fixed limit. In proportional quota sampling, you want to represent the major characteristics of the population by sampling a proportional amount of each, while in non-proportional quota sampling is a bit less restrictive. In this technique, you specify the minimum number of sampled units you want in each category. You will not be concerned with having numbers that match the proportions in the population. Instead, you simply want to have enough to assure that you will be able to talk about even a small groups of population. And this technique is non-probabilistic analog of stratified random sampling. It is usually used to assure that smaller groups are adequately represented in your sample. And that's all. This is the reference or the authors of our lesson for today. Thank you. If you have question, please don't hesitate to send your question via messenger. Thank you.